Ready to go? Fine. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tushita Delhi, and welcome to this evening's talk titled Insight into Emptiness. And we'll begin with a quote from the great Indian master Nagarjuna from the 2nd century. And he says, "By extinguishing actions and mental afflictions, there is liberation. Actions and mental afflictions arise from misconceptions, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. Elaborations will cease through cultivating emptiness." And so this word elaboration here is just another word for what we call self-grasping, grasping onto independent me, independent objective world. And so what Nagarjuna is saying here is that due to this self-grasping mind, this leads to mental afflictions and suffering. But we can overcome this self-grasping through this wisdom of emptiness and thereby achieve liberation from suffering. So let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this evening's talk. So first we'll give a little introduction, the context for this idea of emptiness. Then briefly we'll introduce the view of emptiness. And then we'll look at this self-grasping, what it is and how it actually is really the cause of our suffering, mental afflictions and suffering. And then we'll take a short 10-minute break. And then after the break, we'll do an emptiness meditation, how to come to experience and realize this wisdom of emptiness. And then following that, we'll look at how to find the middle way, because trying to find this view of emptiness is very easy to fall to what I call the two extremes. And so we need to navigate between those two extremes, and we'll look at how we can do that. And then finally, we'll look at space-time. Does space-time exist or not objectively? Because it seems like everything is appearing in space-time, but what about space-time itself? So we'll try and answer that question as well. And then we'll have some time for question and answer at the end of the session. So we've got, I think, 2 hours or a little bit less than 2 hours now. So in the introduction, we'll start with a very famous quote from the Heart Sutra, which says, "Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form also is not other than emptiness." And this Heart Sutra is part of what's called the Perfection of Wisdom teachings from the Buddha, or in Sanskrit, the Prajna Paramita. And it's the Perfection of Wisdom in 25 verses. And these Perfection of Wisdom teachings are building on the foundation teachings from the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths teachings. Because in the Four Noble Truths teachings, he taught that the fundamental ignorance that we are suffering from, what is causing us to be in this state of suffering, is grasping to an autonomous self, that we're grasping onto the belief that there's a me here, that's something a little bit more than just the body and the mind. And if we can eliminate that self-grasping, we can be liberated from suffering. But here in the Perfection of Wisdom teachings, the Buddha went on to say, well, not only how we see ourselves is a problem, but how we see the world as a problem, because we believe there is an objective, independent world out there. And so in the Perfection of Wisdom teachings, the fundamental ignorance we are caught up in is not only grasping to a independent me, but also grasping to an independent objective world. And so therefore, to cut through that, we engage in the wisdom of Vipassana practice. And the Vipassana practice here is this wisdom of emptiness, whereas in the Four Noble Truths, it's just simply the wisdom of no self. And so by coming to realize this emptiness, we can overcome all of our mental afflictions and suffering and achieve liberation. And also in classical physics, from a couple of centuries ago at least, there was this idea or belief that there is an objective world out there. We're just trying to measure it and come to understand that. But now, certainly in the last 50 to 100 years, a lot of physicists are questioning this seemingly objective world. And here I have a quote from one of the greatest theoretical physicists of the 20th century, John Wheeler, who says, useful as it is under everyday circumstances to say that the world exists out there, independent of us, that view can no longer be upheld. There is a strange sense in which this is a participatory universe. And then we also have another quote here from another very well-known quantum physicist, Anton Zeilinger, who's had a lot of discussions together with His Holiness Dalai Lama, and they seem to have a very similar view about reality. And so Anton Zeilinger says, one may be tempted to assume that whenever we ask questions of nature, of the world there outside, there is reality existing independently of what can be said about it. We will now claim that such a position is void of any meaning. It is obvious that any property or feature of reality out there can only be based on information we receive. There cannot be any statement whatsoever about the world or about reality that is not based on such information. It therefore follows that the concept of a reality without at least the ability in principle to make statements about it, to obtain information about its features, is devoid of any possibility of confirmation or proof. This implies that the distinction between information, that is knowledge, and reality is devoid of any meaning. So as we're going to see, this is very, very similar way of speaking to the view of emptiness. So what we're talking about here is this grasping to an independent me, independent objective world, grasping to everything existing independently. Now, in the Buddhist texts, a number of terms are used to describe what we mean by independent existence. Probably the most common term you'll see is a term called inherent existence, that things exist inherently. And that has the idea that things are self-existent, that the universe is made up of many separate, discrete things, each having its own unique identity. Another term that's often used is things existing from their own side. And this has the idea that things exist there objectively. They're already existing there, and we just come along and confirm that existence, that they exist without the need of an observer. And the last term is true existence. Now, generally, something is true if it doesn't deceive us. Now, things appear to exist objectively, independently of us. If that's really how they exist, they would be true, meaning the way in which they appear and the way in which they exist would match. So that's true existence. True existence means existing in the same way in which it appears. So these are three terms describing the same thing, independent existence. But here in the Perfection of Wisdom teachings, the Buddha said things do not exist as they appear, that things do not exist independently. Why? Because they exist dependently. And so this is the reasoning we have here to establish the view of emptiness. And the way it's usually laid out is as follows. Things are empty of inherent existence, i.e., things are not independently existent. Why? Because they are dependent arisings. In other words, they come into existence dependently. And so here, this term emptiness, which in Sanskrit is shunyata, is this phrase, empty of inherent existence. So when we talk about emptiness, we're not saying things don't really exist. That's nihilism. So when we talk about things being empty, we have to say empty of what? What are they empty of? Not existence. They're empty of being independent. So this is emptiness, which actually is a very good translation of the Sanskrit term shunyata. Because shunyata, the shunya actually means zero or empty or hollow, meaning having no essence. And the ta means ness. So emptiness is actually a very good translation of shunyata. So what we're saying here is things are empty of inherent existence because they're dependent arisings, because they exist dependently. So therefore, if we can better understand what do we mean that things are dependent or are dependent arisings, if we can understand that, then that will help us to better understand what do we really mean by this term emptiness. So that's what I'd like to do now, is have a look at how things exist dependently. How do they come into existence dependently? And here we can talk about three ways in which things are dependent arisings. That things come into existence depending on causes and conditions, they exist depending on parts, and they exist depending on labeling. So firstly, causes and conditions. Things exist depending on causes and conditions. When we say cause, we mean substantial cause. Substantial cause is the thing that transforms into the result. For example, a plant or a sprout, the substantial cause of this is the seed. That transforms into the plant. But for that transformation to take place, we need lots of cooperative conditions like soil, sunlight, water, fertilizer, and so forth. So due to the cause of the seed and all of these conditions, then a plant can come into existence. That's quite easy to understand, I think. Also, things exist depending on their parts. Again, the plant exists depending on its parts, because without the root, the stem, the branches, and the leaves, there's no plant. So this also is quite easy to understand. So I don't think any of us here have any difficulty understanding that the plant exists depending on causes and conditions, and the plant exists depends on its parts. Yet, probably a number of us in this room can accept that and yet still hold on to the idea that there's a plant existing there objectively, that there's already a plant existing there, and I just come along and confirm that plant exists there. But actually, they're contradictory ideas. Either the plant exists dependently or the plant exists independently. You can't have both. So why is it that we can accept the plant exists depending on causes and conditions, exists depending on its parts, and yet at the same time accept there's a plant existing there objectively independent of me? The reason is because we don't appreciate causes and conditions and parts at the deepest level. We only understand them superficially. So let's have a look at how to understand them more deeply by going to the third way in which things are dependent, labeling. And also, when we say things depend on labeling, you might think, okay, that means there's a thing there and I'm calling it a plant. That's labeling, isn't it? Quite a superficial understanding of labeling. Labeling is a much deeper understanding than that. So let's have a look at what we mean by labeling. Other terms used for labeling are imputation, designation, conception, all the same meaning. Now, when we look out on the world, what we are actually receiving is a mass of sense data, particularly visual data. And to make sense or meaning out of all of this data, what we do is we draw lines around various collections of data and create meaningful objects. And we do more than that, because in order to communicate with others, we have to give names to the things that we've created to be able to communicate. So labeling is this process of drawing a line, creating an object, and giving it a name. That's labeling. And how we do this labeling is not fixed. It's completely arbitrary, depending on the meaning we want to get out of what we see. For example, here, how many things are here? Well, most often we'd probably draw one line around all of that data, create one object, and call it a star. But on other occasions, it may be more meaningful to draw two lines, create two objects, and say there's two triangles there. On another occasion, it may be more meaningful to draw 6 lines and say there's 6 triangles. Or on another occasion, to draw 7 lines and say there's 6 triangles and a hexagon. Or on another occasion, it may be more meaningful to say there's simply a collection of 18 lines there. So is there 1, 2, 6, 7, or 18 things there? How many things are there? We decide. We decide how many things are there. So therefore, we have the term things are merely labeled. Merely labeled means that things only exist within our conceptual framework, meaning there's no star there. The only star that exists is the one we've created in our mind. That's what merely labeled means. And we also have another term here, not findable, meaning you cannot find a star there in the basis, because the only star that exists is the one that exists within our conceptual mind, doesn't exist there objectively in the basis. So this is what we mean by labeling, this process of creating objects and giving a name. So let's now have a look at, go back to causes and conditions and paths and try to understand them at a deeper level based on our understanding of labeling now. So here we have a timeline. Again, the example of the seed and the plant. So the seed produces the plant, is the cause of the plant. But in this timeline, at what point does the seed become the plant? Now, if seeds and plants exist objectively independent of us, it should be a fixed, obvious point where the seed becomes the plant. But at what point does the seed become the plant? And when we look at that, we can understand the point at which the seed becomes the plant is the point at which the configuration of data stops looking like a seed and starts looking like a plant for us. And each one of us has a slightly different idea of what it means to be a seed and what it means to be a plant. So for some of us, it's already a plant way down here. For some of us, it's here. Some of us, it's further up the line. We decide when the seed becomes the plant. Now, if two things are in a cause and effect relationship, by definition, they cannot exist at the same time. And a seed and a plant are in a cause and effect relationship. So the question is this: does the seed stop existing before the plant comes into existence? So again, the question is, does the seed stop existing before the plant comes into existence? There's only two possibilities, yes or no. Which is it? Most people go no. But if you say no, then the seed exists at the same time as the plant. Illogical. They cannot exist at the same time because they're in a cause and effect relationship. So no is illogical. But then if you say yes, the seed has ceased to exist, where is the plant coming from? Because the seed is gone. So yes is illogical, which means our common sense idea of causality based on things existing objectively is completely illogical. It cannot work. It cannot possibly be. There cannot be causality if things exist objectively. Whereas what we're saying here is things do not exist objectively, so we don't have this logical absurdity. Now we say that the plant exists depending on the seed. But this view of emptiness is also saying the seed exists depending on the plant. So how does the seed exist depending on the plant? And it's not that the plant produces more seeds. That's not the answer. So how does the seed's existence depend on the plant to exist? The reason is you can only call something a seed if you have the idea plant. Otherwise, what does seed mean? It has no meaning. So seed, just like cause, the word cause, without the word result, just has no meaning. So cause exists depending on result. Seed exists depending on plant. What about parts? And we'll use the pen here. We say that the pen exists depending on the parts. But can you find the pen in that basis? So if we start pulling it apart, is the blue cap, is that a pen? No. Is the tube a pen? Is the end thing in the end a pen? No. We just pull it apart. Where's the pen? None of that's a pen. But then people go, oh, that's easy. The pen is the collection of those things. Well, there's the collection. Is that a pen? Oh, no, no, no. Has to be in a certain shape. So at what point does the pen come into existence? When we start to assemble it? At what point? The point at which the pen comes into existence is the point at which that configuration of data closely enough resembles our concept of pen. And generally our concepts have two parts. Two is appearance and functionality. So when that collection, when we start putting it together, and what we've put together appears closely enough to our idea of pen and seems to function according to our idea of pen, then there's a pen. We decide when the pen comes into existence. If the pen were to exist objectively, it would mean that if a caveman came along, they would start writing. I don't think so. They would probably see it as some sort of weapon to stab with. And if a dog came along, they'd probably see some sort of chewing stick. And if a little tiny ant came along, maybe a home to live in. So is this, from its own side, a pen, a weapon, a chewing stick, or a home? None of those things. From the side of the observer, all of those things. Also here, we say the pen exists depending on its parts. But also, the part depends on the whole. Because you can only have part of a pen if you have the idea pen, whether or not the pen exists or not. So also here, like cause exists depending on result, part exists depending on the whole. This idea of labeling, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we must do that. If we don't do that, if we don't draw lines around collections of data and create meaningful objects, we couldn't make any sense or meaning out of anything we saw. It'd just be a mess. We couldn't function. So there's no problem with doing it. In fact, we need to do that. And as we grow and get older and we encounter new situations, unfamiliar, often we'll look and go, what's that? Because we haven't got a concept for what we see. So we're trying to work out how to draw the lines to create a meaningful thing, something we've never seen before. And so we're constantly improving our ability to do this. And we need to do this to function better and better. But the problem is we don't realize this is what we're doing. Because soon as we draw a line and create an object and give it a name, it seems like it's already existing there. I mean, when we look in this direction, nearly every time we'll draw a line around here and say, oh, there's a cup. But as soon as we do that, it magically seems like, oh, there's a cup existing there objectively already before I came into the room. This is the problem. So instead of understanding that we are creating all these things, it seems like the world is already divided up into many separate discrete things. But then you may ask, well, why is that a problem? Why is it a problem to see the world is already divided up into many separate things already? The problem is that this is what's called self-grasping, and this is, as we saw in Nagarjuna's quote, leads to mental afflictions and suffering. And very shortly, we'll explain that process. How, by believing the world is already divided into many separate discrete things, how this is really causing all of our mental afflictions like attachment, anger, jealousy, and so forth, and that's leading to our suffering. So we'll go through that process in some detail very shortly. But before that, a few more points about this turning lines into boundaries, seeing the world is already divided into many separate discrete things. Generally, in most of our experiences, the very first line we draw is we draw a line around here and we create the experiencer, the me, because there's single experience. And within single experience, there are two aspects. There's experiencer and experienced. And we need to distinguish those two things, otherwise really not able to function at all. In fact, I I understand that a newborn baby can't do that. A newborn baby doesn't know, it can't distinguish itself from the world. It has to learn to do that. But again, the problem is, once we draw this line and we create the me, then immediately it seems like, oh, I exist independent. So what we do is we contract around the experiencer part of experience. We grasp onto that as existing independent of what we experience. And so we are then out of sync with the interdependent nature of reality, because we're seeing ourselves as independent of what we experience. And as we just briefly saw, and we'll talk about more details shortly, this leads to mental afflictions and suffering. And this self-grasping is completely illogical, because we can ask this question, is this big? Is it big? Big can only exist relative to small. It can't exist, that can't be big, and that can't be small. They only dependent on each other. Similarly, up only exists relative to down, in relative to out. Similarly, experiencer only exists relative to experienced. Me only exists relative to world or you or object. Subject only exists relative to object. But by grasping onto the me and believing that this me exists independent of the experience is exactly like saying this is big. It's just completely illogical. And so we're completely out of sync with reality. Now, most often in our experiences, in our behavior, we have this self-grasping very strong. Me going there, me saying this, me doing that. Very strong self-grasping. The more self-grasping, the more out of sync we are with reality, the bigger the chance of mental afflictions and suffering. But sometimes in our experiences, this self-grasping is not as strong. And that often happens when we're more focused on the activity rather than the me. For example, when we're absorbed in watching an interesting program on TV, absorbed in reading a good book, absorbed in solving a problem at work. On those occasions, we are more focused on the activity rather than the agent. And what's our experience there is because of the less self-grasping, things seem to flow much better. Time seems to move more quickly. We're more in a flow state, less mental afflictions and suffering. And that's very much exemplified in people who've developed a high level of focus in their activity. For example, professional musicians, professional athletes who spend thousands of hours of training in their activity. So much so that when they're engaging in that activity, they're so highly focused on the activity, they often report that they're in the zone or the flow state. So much so that they report that often there was just the music playing. There was no sense of a me. There was just the activity happening. I didn't really have a sense of me. Not only do they report that, but they also report on that occasion peak performance, optimum performance. Why? Because we're much more in sync with the interdependent nature of reality, but only because of a lessening of self-grasping due to increased focus. What we're wanting to do here in this Vipassana practice, this wisdom practice of emptiness, is come to realize that there are no boundaries. There's no independent me, no independent objective world there. There's not one single boundary in the entire universe. And if we can realize that, it will lead to boundless love and compassion for everyone. In fact, this is a measure of how our emptiness practice is going. If we're really getting an experience of emptiness and going deeper with that, what you will find is that the natural expression of emptiness is loving kindness. Because now, me here, them there. Suffering here, I really care about that a lot. I really care about suffering here a lot. Suffering there, well, if it's my friend or family, maybe. Suffering over there, I don't know them. No, I don't care. Suffering over there, that person I don't like. I really hope they suffer, actually, because I don't like them. But if we realize emptiness, then whether suffering arises here, there, or there, equal. Suffering is arising. The natural response is loving kindness and compassion. So this is a measure of how our emptiness practice is going. So let's now have a look at how does this self-grasping, how grasping to independent me, independent world, how does that lead to all of our mental afflictions such as attachment, aversion, anger, jealousy, and so forth, and how that leads to suffering? So here we can talk about 6 steps. And here this term ignorance you see in the slide is another word for self-grasping. So ignorance is this grasping to independent me, independent world. And seed of ignorance means the habit of doing that. And according to Buddhism, we've had the habit of this grasping since we were born and well before. And when we look out on the world, everything appears to us to exist completely independent of us. But this view of emptiness is saying these appearances are deceptive. Things do not exist as they appear. There appears to be a subject-object duality now, but that's not how things exist. So this appearance we are receiving is called mistaken dualistic appearance. There appears to be subject-object duality, but this is deceiving us. This is mistaken. This is not how things exist. But because everything appears to us exist in this way, we've never seen them existing in any other way, there's no reason to question appearances. Because if we ask anyone else, they'll agree with us. Yeah, sure, these things exist independent of me. That's how it appears to me. So there's no reason to question these appearances. So we never do. So our habit of grasping just kicks in and we just grasp. It's not intellectual, it's instinctive. So as soon as we see the world, then instantly grasping to me, grasping to objective world. That's step 2. That's ignorance. Now, every time we experience something in the world, we have a mental factor of feeling present. And in Buddhism, feeling doesn't mean emotion. Feeling is a translation of the Sanskrit term Vedana. And Vedana is simply experiencing things as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So every time we experience something, we experience it as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So let's say we're looking at these flowers over here. They appear to us to exist completely independent of us. We never question that appearance. We have the habit of believing, of grasping to those appearances. We just grasp. Yep, there's flowers existing there objectively. And then let's say when we look at those flowers, we have a pleasant experience. That pleasant experience, together with belief that those flowers exist objectively, will naturally lead us to assume there must be some attractive quality there that's causing my pleasant feeling. So we'll see them as inherently attractive or attractive from their own side. Or if I'm having an unpleasant feeling, together with the belief that those flowers exist objectively, that will naturally lead me to assume there must be some unattractive quality there that's causing my unpleasant feeling. So we'll see them as objectively unattractive, inherently unattractive. Or neutral just means neither pleasant nor unpleasant. We'll just see them as inherently neutral. That's step 3, the misconception. We're now seeing, based on our pleasant, unpleasant, neutral experience, we're seeing them as either inherently attractive, or objectively attractive, objectively unattractive, or objectively neutral. But according to this view of emptiness, this is a misconception. But once we have that misconception, step 4 easily follows. And that is, again, let's say we're having a pleasant experience when we see these flowers. I like pleasant experiences. I want pleasant experiences. Those flowers seem to be causing my pleasant experience. I want those flowers. Attachment. or if I'm having an unpleasant experience, I don't like unpleasant experiences, I don't want them. Those flowers seem to be causing my unpleasant experience. Get them out of here, aversion. Or if it's a neutral experience, that will simply reinforce our mistaken belief those flowers exist objectively. And so here at step 4, we see the word confusion. That's simply another word for ignorance. Here, confusion doesn't mean we're confused whether or not they're flowers or not. We're confused about how they exist. We believe they exist objectively. So this attachment, aversion, and confusion or ignorance are what's called the 3 poisons. These are the 3 core mental afflictions. And we see here actually part of a diagram, what's called in Buddhism, Bhava Chakra, or the wheel of life. Maybe some of you have seen it before. Right at the middle of that diagram, we see here, I've taken the middle part of the diagram out. We see 3 animals in the middle of the diagram: a pig, a rooster, and a snake. The pig is symbolizing ignorance, the rooster attachment, the snake aversion. And so here we see that the pig is grabbing the tail of both the rooster and the snake, meaning out of the mouth of ignorance comes attachment and aversion, meaning by grasping onto things that exist independently, we end up with attachment to pleasant things, aversion to unpleasant things. And then all the other mental afflictions come out of one of those or a combination of them. And those mental afflictions are driving our behavior. And here we see outside the 3 animals, on the right side, dark, and on the left side, white. And the left side, white, we see some people or beings moving upwards, and on the black side, dark side, moving downwards. That is action or karma, meaning if we do virtuous actions, we'll end up with a good result. That's the white actions, happiness result. If we do non-virtuous actions based on the mental afflictions, we end up with suffering results. So that's what those 2 colors are meaning there. So therefore, these mental afflictions are driving our behavior, our actions. And the Buddhist assertion is that every action we do based on a mental affliction has a result. And the results of our actions are our experiences, our various experiences. And the Buddha used the word dukkha to describe all of our experiences. And that word dukkha is translated as suffering. But here, the word suffering doesn't mean suffering as we normally understand it. Normally, when we hear the word suffering, for us, it means some sort of unpleasant, painful experience, mental or physical experience. The Buddha wasn't saying all of our actions just lead to painful and unpleasant experiences, because the virtuous actions don't. So dukkha here, this word suffering, is a translation of dukkha. And this word dukkha is describing all of our experiences, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So this is how this self-grasping is leading to all of our mental afflictions and suffering. And so this is what Nagarjuna is saying in that verse we saw on the first slide. Exactly this process he's describing. Nagarjuna is saying by extinguishing actions and mental afflictions, so if we don't want step 6, that is suffering or dukkha, we have to get rid of step 5, which is action. To get rid of 5, we have to get rid of 4, 3, and 2, which are the mental afflictions. So if we can extinguish all of those, there's liberation. This is what Nagarjuna is saying. And he's saying actions and mental afflictions arise from misconceptions, step 3, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. Elaborations is another word for ignorance, step 2, and step 1 is the seed of ignorance. So if we want to get rid of all of our mental afflictions and suffering, we need to go back to step 1 and 2. We need to get rid of these, what Nagarjuna calls elaborations, or we need to eliminate self-grasping. And here Nagarjuna says elaborations or self-grasping will cease through cultivating emptiness. So this is how we can overcome mental afflictions and suffering through this wisdom of emptiness. So that's all I wanted to cover now. So let's take a short 10-minute break. And after the break, we'll do a little emptiness meditation. And then we'll go on to look at how we can find this, what's called the middle way path, this wisdom of emptiness. So that's to come in the second half. But let's first take a 10-minute break. Oh, do we want to pause this?
Sure. Yeah. Just pause it. Pause.
Here?
No, the recording.
You want to stop it? Or,
Not stop, pause. Yeah.
It's the first one, yeah.
Yeah.
Start again. I'd like to begin with a short emptiness meditation. And with cultivating this insight into emptiness, it's often recommended that we start by investigating me, the person, because this is where we start to go wrong. In our experience, the very first line we draw is a line around here, create the me, and then grasp onto that. And then we grasp onto the world. And the me is something very familiar to us. So that's what we're going to do. Where is this me that really seems to be here? So we'll do that meditation. So if you'd like to find a nice, comfortable posture, let's do that practice. We begin by establishing a nice, comfortable posture. That is to keep the back nice and straight. And at the same time, allow the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. And with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen. Simply releasing them into space. And allowing the mind to come to rest. To rest in the stillness of the present moment. And from that stillness, start to gently notice the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Now, do you have a sense that there is a me here who is meditating? A me who is trying to relax the body, and a me who's trying to focus the mind on the breath. A me that it seems to exist from its own side and doesn't seem to depend upon anything else to exist. Do you have this experience of being me, the meditator, existing here objectively? But can this me here meditating be found anywhere? So first, thoroughly search the body and look for the me who is meditating. Is the me who's meditating somewhere inside the head? Perhaps somewhere behind the eyes. Look closely. Is the brain, is that the me who's meditating? Or is the brain simply something which me, the meditator, is using? Is the whole body itself, is that the me who's meditating here? Or is the whole body itself simply something which me, the meditator, is trying to relax? Can me, the meditator, be found anywhere within the mind? So again, search thoroughly every part of the mind and look for the me who's meditating. Are any of the thoughts, emotions, or concepts in the mind, are any of these the me who's meditating? Or are thoughts, emotions, and concepts simply things which me, the meditator, has? Is the whole mind itself, is that the me who's meditating here? Or is the whole mind itself simply something which me, the meditator, is using to focus on the breath. Is the combination of the body and the mind, is that the me who's meditating here? Or is the combination of the body and the mind simply a collection of two things, which me, the meditator, is trying to train? Yet, other than the body and the mind, what else is there here? If there's nothing more than the body and the mind here, then where is the me that possesses this body and mind? Where is me, the meditator, who is relaxing the body and focusing the mind? Where is this me? You can't find this me. Simply rest in the experience of not finding, knowing it's nowhere to be found. Just rest there. And we can bring the meditation to a close. When we begin this sort of emptiness practice, there are a couple of common experiences that people have. And one is a lot of fear can arise, particularly existential fear. And this is mentioned by the great Tibetan master Panchen Losang Chögyal Gyaltsen, who says, it is said that when you initially ascertain this, and he means emptiness, if you have not previously familiarized yourself with the view of emptiness, then fear will arise. And that if you have previously familiarized yourself, then mental joy will arise. And that's going to lead into the topic coming up next, is that for us now, there's just two possibilities. Either there is a real objective me here, or there's no me at all. We don't see any other possibility. So when we look for this me that really we believe in, that really seems to be here, and we don't seem to find it, we misinterpret the experience of not finding to mean there's no me at all. So if we're having this existential fear arising in this practice, it's a good sign. It means you're doing the practice correctly, but you're actually misinterpreting the not finding to mean no me at all. Because remember, not finding doesn't mean no me. Not finding means no objective me. In fact, if you don't exist, you can't have fear arising. So fear arising is proof that you exist. So what's the solution? As Panchen Losang Chögyal Gyaltsen says, the solution is to study more about emptiness, familiarize yourself with the view of emptiness more, to better understand that not finding doesn't mean no me, it means no independent me. Then, as he says, if you have a good view, understanding of emptiness, and you have that experience of not finding, instead of fear arising, you'll have mental joy arising. Why? Because you will realize the thing that you've grasped to your entire life that's caused you so much mental afflictions and suffering simply does not exist. Actually, if you think about it, it's crazy. A non-existent, something that never has existed, does not exist, cannot exist ever, is the root cause of all of our mental afflictions and suffering. It's only because we believe it exists that we suffer. Another common experience that often people have when they begin this practice, this Vipassana practice of emptiness, is we start to investigate and then we get really confused and not sure where we're supposed to look and so forth. And that's a sign that our attention skills are lacking. It's the same as if you're trying to solve a complex problem and you're not highly focused, you'll get lost and confused very easily. Similarly here, if you get lost and confused easily, then we need to go back and do some more what's called shamatha practice. We need to improve our attention skills so that we can then investigate more clearly. And another common experience people have when they begin this is we sit down and then rather than actually going through the investigation, sometimes we turn it into an intellectual exercise. And then we'll always come up with an answer based on our belief system. You know, if we maybe have a Christian background, our intellectual mind in the meditation go, well, I don't need to look because I know I'm the soul, because that's what goes to heaven. I'm the soul. Okay. Don't need to look. Or if we've followed some Buddhist studies and we hear about this idea of subtle mental continuum that goes from life to life, then in our meditation we go, I don't need to look because I know for sure I'm the subtle mental continuum because I learned that. Or if we've followed some more New Age philosophy that says things like everything in the universe is subtle energy, subtle vibration, then we'll go, I'm just subtle energy, I'm subtle vibration. I don't need to search, I know that. And then, of course, we're not being an empirical scientist. We're just sort of accepting our belief system, which may or may not be accurate. And I can guarantee you that when you're getting angry, you're not identifying with soul, subtle energy, or a subtle mental continuum as the one that's getting angry. So we need to leave our belief system out and be like a true empirical scientist and just investigate directly. What is the result? What do I find? or not find. So that's a few common experiences that can come up in this practice. Now we'll go into what's called finding the middle way. And here's the great challenge in this emptiness practice is, as I've already mentioned, for us now, there just seems to be two possibilities. Either there is a real objective me here and a real objective world out there, or there's no me and no world. So we're caught in what's called the two extremes. The first one is called the extreme of existence, and that's where most of us are stuck now. That is grasping onto an independent me and an independent objective world. And that's sometimes called the extreme of superimposition, meaning we are superimposing something on reality. So there is a me in a world, but what we are superimposing onto the me in world is that the me exists independently and the world exists independently. That's what we're adding on top of reality. That's the extreme of existence. Most of us are there now. And when we come to investigate this emptiness, come to try and find this me, and we don't seem to find it, then we just flip to the other extreme, because for us, there's only two possibilities. Either there is a real independent me or there's no me. And so often then we flip to the other extreme called nihilism or non-existence. And that's when the fear arises. And that extreme is sometimes called the extreme of deprecation, meaning we are stripping away reality itself. There is a me and there a world, but we strip that away. We deprecate reality and end up with nothing. So that's the extreme of non-existence or nihilism. So in this view of emptiness, we are trying to find that middle way between these two extremes without going to one or the other. And a sure sign that we're stuck in one or two of these extremes is if we say things like, if things function, they can't be empty. No chance. If they're real and they function, they can't be empty. And if things are empty, they couldn't function because they wouldn't really exist. And sometimes I hear people who've been apparently Buddhists for quite some years and studied a lot, still saying things like, oh, it doesn't matter because everything's empty. That is completely the wrong view of emptiness. That is the view of nihilism. The correct view is because things are empty, everything matters. And everything functions, therefore they must be empty. So that is a measure of finding the middle way. If we have those ideas together, that because things function, they must be empty, and because things are empty, they can function. That is the correct view of emptiness. That is the middle way. Because if this, for example, if this cup existed objectively, existed independently, if it had a unique nature from its own side of being a cup, if that's what its nature was objectively, you couldn't create it, you couldn't destroy it, it couldn't function. But because it has no unique nature in itself of being a cup, therefore you can create it, you can destroy it, and it can function. That is the correct view of emptiness. That is the middle way. Or in other words, using a common expression, to find the middle way, we want to throw out the bathwater without throwing out the baby. If you throw the baby out with the bathwater, you end up with nothing. That's the middle way. And that's what Nagarjuna also says in his text here. He says, that which arises dependently and relatedly is explained as being empty. And that which is empty is dependently designated. This is the middle way path. So this, what we can say is that emptiness and functioning world are like two sides of a coin. This is the correct understanding. So if by seeing the world, we therefore understand it's empty of inherent existence, we have the view of emptiness is complete, and then we can really go into the meditation without dropping into the extreme of nihilism or non-existence. And to explain this view of emptiness, many analogies are used. The one that I particularly find very helpful is the analogy of a dream. Now, when we're dreaming, in the dream, there appears to be an independent dream me here and an independent objective dream world out there. And then, of course, if we meet something pleasant in the dream, we have attachment. If we meet something unpleasant in the dream, we have aversion, maybe fear, anxiety, or a nightmare. But then, in the middle of the dream, if we suddenly realize this is a dream, i.e., we have what's called lucid dreaming, we're not waking up. In the middle of the dream, we suddenly realize this is a dream, then there will still appear to be an independent me here. There'll still appear to be an independent dream world out there. But now, because we're lucid in the dream, we will realize directly that these appearances are deceiving us. That even though the dream world appears to exist objectively, this dream world is a product of our mind. Which means if we're lucid in the dream, then if something pleasant appears, it would be very difficult to have attachment. If something unpleasant appears in a lucid dream, very difficult to have any aversion. We would enjoy the dream a lot more. So this view of emptiness is saying that the waking world is like a dream. In that now in our waking world, there appears to be an independent me here, an independent world out there. We encounter something pleasant, attachment, unpleasant, aversion. But if we wake up from our sleep of ignorance by realizing emptiness, there will still appear to be an independent me here. There will still appear to be an independent world out there. But because we're lucid now, because we've realized emptiness, we will directly realize these appearances are deceiving us, that there is no independent objective world there, no independent subjective me here, which means it would become very difficult to have attachment to anything pleasant, very difficult to have aversion to anything unpleasant, and we would enjoy the waking world a lot more. So I find the analogy of a dream very, very helpful in understanding emptiness. But then you may ask, well, if you can't find the me here, but there's a me, how do I exist? We're not saying there's no me at all. There's no Buddhist tradition that says there's no me. That's nihilism. The question is not whether or not we exist. The fact that you can ask that question proves you exist. The question is, how do we exist? And now we're grasping onto ourselves existing independently. But this view of emptiness is saying we're not existing like that. We are a dependent arising, merely labeled. So again, using the example of the pen is merely labeled depending on the parts. The pen is not the collection of the parts. So they're not saying the same thing. One is saying the pen is the collection of the parts. The other one, the view of emptiness, is saying the pen is merely labeled depending on the collection of the parts. That's the pen that exists. Similarly, the person is not the body and the mind. The person is merely labeled depending on the body and the mind. That's the me that exists. Sometimes called the mere I, the merely labeled person, the merely labeled me. But then also, on that basis, often people ask, well, who or what is it that goes through this life and goes from life to life? Technically, well, the question is a bit loaded because nothing goes through time. Superficially, it seems like this cup is moving through time. Same cup that was here yesterday, same cup tomorrow. But actually, if we look at this cup very closely, what do we see? Is just a lot of flux and change. Flux and change, that's all that's here. And so what we find in the physical world is there's no static things moving through time. There's just flux and change. It's just a constant flow of change that's so subtle we can't see it with our eyes. But there's a constant flow of change. I mean, science has proven this. Constant flow of change. And to make sense or meaning out of this constant flow of change, we draw lines around various collections of flow and give it a name, cup, and so forth. That's okay. But there's no static cup moving through time. There's just change. Similarly, with the mind, it seems like our mind is a static thing moving through time. But like the physical world, the mind is just a continuum of experience, constantly changing, constantly changing. So whether we're talking at the physical level or at the mental level, there's nothing moving through time. There's just a flow of change. So the person is just labeled on the basis of that flow of physical change and mental change, constant. And the I is what is labeled in every moment on that change. So the I is also a constant flow of change. And here, this idea of flow of change, or in other words, we can say impermanence, can be a very good way to get into the view of emptiness. Because philosophically, the view of emptiness is, I mean, it's very easy to just say the words, oh, everything's empty of inherent existence. I mean, it's easy to mouth those words, but to actually really understand what that means is not so easy. But one way we can approach that is through the idea of impermanence. Because impermanence is something that science has proven that we can relate to, and it can be a door into emptiness. For example, when impermanence is explained, we often hear impermanence means things are changing from moment to moment. But then we get this idea, okay, in a certain moment, there's a thing. In the next moment, it becomes a different thing. And then the next moment, it becomes a different thing again. Is that impermanence? Impossible. Because if we have a thing existing in the present moment, then no matter how short that moment of time is, what we are saying then is that during that brief moment of time, we have a static thing existing, which means that thing is not changing because during that brief moment, it didn't change. So it's not impermanent. In fact, if that were the case, why would it suddenly change? It couldn't. It couldn't change. So therefore, you can't have something existing objectively in the present moment. Because if you say there's a thing existing objectively in the present moment, it would mean that during that brief moment of time, there's a thing there that's not changing. So it's not impermanent, whereas everything is impermanent. So therefore, impermanence doesn't mean a thing becoming next thing, becoming next thing. It just means constant flow of change, meaning you can't point to anything objectively in any moment as existing objectively. So if we understand impermanence to mean just constant flow of change, that can really, and that therefore means nothing can exist objectively in the moment, that is very close to the understanding of emptiness. So this can be very helpful in understanding emptiness, really understanding what we mean by impermanence. But then you might say, well, okay, seems like what you're saying is that there's just constant flow of change, physical and mental. But that's happening within space and time. No, I mean, time and space exist objectively, doesn't it? And within that, we have this flow. No, that's not what Buddhism is saying. Buddhism is saying, like no thing exists objectively, space and time themselves do not exist objectively. You cannot find objective time. You cannot find objective space. And in fact, classical physics, of course, as I mentioned in the last few centuries, has been trying to measure that seemingly objective world that exists within objective space-time. But now, in the last so many years, quite a number of well-known physicists are not only challenging the fact of an existing independent world, but they're also challenging the existence of objective space-time. And so I've got a couple of quotes here from, again, one from Anton Zeilinger, quantum physicist who's had a lot of discussions with the Dalai Lama, and he says, space is only defined by the bodies in space, like big and small. You can only have space is relative to bodies. You can't have space objectively. Bodies define the space. The notion of space in itself, without stars and so on, is an empty concept. It does not make sense for a physicist. Space is a way of saying where something is. Time is a way to say when something happens. That can only be said in relation to something else. In itself, it has no meaning. I would say time belongs to those things of which we have learned that we can only make relational statements. So I would say there is no absolute time. It is only in relation to something else. And then a quote from a up-and-coming brilliant theoretical physicist, Nima Akani Hamid, from the Princeton University. He says the following: many, many separate arguments, all very strong individually, suggests that the very notion of space-time is not a fundamental one. Space-time is doomed. There is no such thing as space-time fundamentally in the actual underlying description of the laws of physics. That's very startling, because for what physics is supposed to be about is describing things as they happen in space and time. So if there's no space-time, it's not clear what physics is about. That's why this is a hard problem. That's a serious comment. And then lastly, from a cognitive scientist, Donald Hoffman, who I really think he's really one of the true empirical scientists, and I really admire him a lot. He says, as a conscious realist, I am postulating conscious experiences as ontological primitives, the most basic ingredients of the world. I believe that consciousness and its contents are all that exist. Space-time, matter, and fields never were the fundamental denizens of the universe, but have always been from their very beginning among the humbler contents of consciousness, dependent on it for their very being. So while neuroscientists struggle to understand how there can be such a thing as first-person reality, quantum physicists have to grapple with the mystery of how there can be anything but a first-person reality. And if you're interested, I can highly recommend a talk on YouTube called The Convergence of Science and Spirituality, a conversation between Donald Hoffman and Rupert Spira, who's very well-known Western teacher of Advaita Vedanta, and their views are very, very similar. And they talk about things like why the concept of space-time is doomed, how close are we to a theory of everything, can maths describe reality, and is science finally catching up with what the great spiritual traditions have been telling us for centuries? Because Donald Hoffman, together with mathematicians, in the cognitive science field, most cognitive scientists are materialists. Most of them are trying to work out or try to prove how conscious experience comes from brain activity, basically. And that's how Donald Hoffman started many years ago, but he found there's been no progress made. And so he's flipped it the other way. So his basic theory is now consciousness is primary, and he's trying to see how quantum mechanics and the world can come out of consciousness. So he's working with mathematicians to mathematically model the mind to try to come up with a theory of how this can be. And his ideas very, very similar to Rupert Spira, Advaita Vedanta, non-dual tradition, very similar to the view of emptiness as well. So that's all I wanted to talk about this evening. So any questions about anything covered this evening?
We talk, the whole lecture is about emptiness. The whole Buddhism is basically about emptiness. I've attended a lot of lectures. Recently, I've been attending lectures at Elaborations
Attending lectures where, sorry?
in Tibet House.
Tibet House.
And I've studied Buddhism since 1990s. How do we attain to the inner emptiness? You see,
How do we
attain to the actual emptiness? The theoretical-
experience,
Yeah, not experience. How do we attain to that? See,
attend or attain? Attain. How do you realize emptiness?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, all the theories are teaching emptiness. Theoretically, we are being taught emptiness. How do we actualize the inner emptiness of the body and the mind? If I'm able to convey myself
Yeah,
properly.
yeah, sure.
See,
Yeah.
all the theories are teaching emptiness theoretically, and theory wise it's I can understand, but actually I'm not able to actualize ever the inner body wise and mentally.
Yeah.
See, it's like I'll just give you a hypothetical example.
Yeah, I understand your question.
Yeah. And if I understand it theoretically as if you've seen let's say the river Yamuna, there's a river flowing in Delhi, it's Yamuna River. It's so dirty. See, if you empty that, if you clean that whole river, you'll find that the empty molecules are here at the atomic level. So if you theoretically I'm saying, to clean your human body and the mind, you will, if you can intervene both. So how do we actualize that?
All the Buddhist traditions talk about, whether Theravada or Mahayana, talk about three main practices, the three higher trainings: ethics, concentration, wisdom. Shila, Samadhi, Prajna. All Buddhist traditions, they are the core. In the Mahayana, they're expanded into the six perfections, and in the Theravada, they're the noble eightfold path, but they come down to the same three practices. So the foundation is ethics. So if we're not being ethical, forget about realizing emptiness. If we're caught up in unethical behavior, the mind will be agitated. There's no way we're going to realize emptiness. So ethics is the foundation, because we need to have that good actions. That's like the fuel for everything. If we don't have that, you can do as much Vipassana practice as you want, you won't get anywhere. So that's the fertile ground for everything, is ethics. And ethics doesn't mean just avoiding harmful behavior. Ethics means helping others as well. That's the foundation. The next level is samadhi, or in Mahayana and Tibetan tradition, shamatha practice. We have to refine the mind to make it a workable tool. Like example, if a scientist has a theory about something and they want to experimentally see whether it's true or not, then they'll have some sort of equipment where they run an experiment. But if that equipment is not functioning perfectly, what's going to be the result? All sorts of funny results. Now, unfortunately, what we do is we try to do Vipassana practice, which is running experiments like the empirical scientists with faulty equipment. Our mind is faulty because it's dull, it's agitated, it's distracted, it's not highly focused. So if we want to come to realize, taste and realize emptiness, we need functioning equipment. We need to do shamatha practice. We need to develop single-pointed attention. We need, in other words, a calm, clear, focused mind so that we can very clearly investigate to penetrate reality. Without that, we won't get anywhere. But then we need to do the experiment. We need to run the experiment. That's Vipassana. That's like an example is the meditation we just did, looking for the me. We can look for the me, we can look for the body, look for the mind, look for whatever we want. And if we do this practice, and like an empirical scientist, they don't just run an experiment once and go, whatever the result is, that's it. They run it again and again and again and again and again, many times. And then after they've run it many times, then they also look at other scientists who've run it. What did you get? What are your results? because maybe they did it wrong. So we need to, on the basis of ethics, shamatha practice, vipassana practice, we need to meditate again, again, and again, start to have a little taste. But then we need peer review, because in this vipassana practice, it's very easy to come up with some strange ideas and come up, oh, I've realized emptiness, when we're gone completely astray because our technique wasn't good. Like a scientist could be running experiments, but not quite correctly, and come up with some strange results. We need peer review. So that's why we need a qualified teacher, and they can correct any mistakes we make. And then we run it again and again and again. And then if we have that calm, clear, focused mind, and we run the vipassana practice, we'll start to have a little taste of emptiness. Maybe that taste might be quite profound, but what will happen is we have a little we have a little taste of emptiness, and that may affect us a little bit after the meditation, maybe for some minutes or hours or even a bit longer. And what we'll notice during that time is our mind will be more calm, we'll be more open-hearted to others, but then it'll wear off and we'll go back to our normal habits. So we keep running it again and again, deeper and deeper, so that experience lasts longer and longer and longer after the meditation, until we have the shamatha and vipassana unified. Then we fully penetrate, and then we have a stable experience that will last a long time. So this is the stages we need to go through. And then once we've realized emptiness directly, still not over, we still have to keep meditating again and again and again, realizing emptiness directly. Because one realization of emptiness is not enough to clean our mind. Only a little bit clean. Then we have to keep doing it again, many times. And eventually, way down the track, we can achieve liberation. So that's the stages we go through. And unfortunately, what I see is, as you said, a lot of teachings about emptiness directly or indirectly, vipassana practice in all the traditions, and a lot of people putting a lot of effort into vipassana practice, but somehow this shamatha practice sort of gets left out. And so people wonder why their vipassana practice is not getting any results. They meditate a lot, investigating, and they may have a little taste, but it's very weak and it doesn't last. And then they just get nowhere. It's because the tool of the mind is not sharp. So that's why we need the shamatha. We need to combine those two if we really want to make the progress. So that's, I think, where I see in many traditions, including Tibetan tradition, where many people fall down, is they may put a lot of emphasis into vipassana, emptiness meditation, but they don't have the basis, shamatha, and sometimes not even a basis in ethics. Does that sort of answer the question?
There's an interrelated question I have. You see, I come back to that same example. See, there's a Yamuna river. Okay, it's dirty. If you try searching for the inner emptiness in there, you can spend years and years and times, you can never attain to inner emptiness. If you see the clear waters of Mansarovar, see, I'm just giving you a simplified version. If you see those waters so clean there, and if you dive into those waters, you'll be able to see each molecule.
Correct. This is shamatha.
Okay. So how do you empty
Shamatha.
that? How do you empty that in a body first? How do you empty that?
Empty what?
The body and the mind first, because if you have it.
Ethics. Stop doing harmful actions, do good actions, and then on that basis do shamatha practice, and then you'll have exactly what you're looking for. Then you'll dive into clear waters if you have ethics and shamatha. Without ethics and shamatha, it'll be murky waters. You won't get anywhere. They're the two you need, ethics and shamatha. Then it'll be clear, crystal clear water. You dive in, you'll cut straight through in your vipassana practice.
And what is the deeper meaning of those ethics? What is the deeper meaning of it?
Deeper meaning.
Yeah, of this ethic word.
Well, ethics, Sheila, in Sanskrit. Sheila, avoiding harmful behavior and helping others, doing virtuous actions. That's ethics. Because you need that momentum. You need that momentum to carry you. That's the basis. Because if you don't have that momentum, you won't go anywhere. The Tibetans have a saying like, someone puts a lot of effort into practice but doesn't seem to get anywhere. The Tibetans say, oh, they don't have the merit. They don't have the merit to do it. And that merit is what you get from doing good things. That positive energy. That's the foundation. Without that, you won't go anywhere. That's why ethics comes first in all Buddhist traditions. And on that basis, with that positive energy, that foundation, or in other words, you could say good karma, then you can clear the mind through shamatha practice, make it sharp and clear and focused. Then when you use that mind, you can cut through emptiness very easily, very easy. But people miss out those two. Ethics, I don't hurt people much, but they don't, that's it, which is okay, but not enough. We need to do more than that. And then the shamatha, don't really put much effort into it. And then they try to, it's like trying to find clarity in the murky river. That's vipassana practice without shamatha. You won't find any clarity because your mind is confused, murky. You won't cut through anything.
Then you said that, we have this belief that we are like ascension beings independently existing. But I feel that if I truly believe that I'm independently existing, fear would never arise because that would mean that nothing can harm me. I'm existing independently.
You couldn't function, could you? If nothing can harm you, you couldn't function because you wouldn't be able to interact with anything. No?
I can interact, but
You can interact, but you can't harm? Isn't that a bit contradictory?
I can interact with my body, right?
Really? If it's independent?
No. So like right now the belief is that there is mind, there is body, and there is little me somewhere.
That's course. That's a belief, yeah.
That's one of the beliefs.
One of the beliefs, yeah.
Right. Like, and within that belief, there is that I can this little me can make the body function, make the mind also calm, as you were saying in the meditation. But if this was independently existing, if somebody harms my body, this shouldn't get fear, but it does.
It does because it can't independently exist.
Right. No, my question was that
Yeah.
if the belief was this strong, that I am independently existing, fear wouldn't arise.
It's the exact opposite. It's because you believe your independent existence, fear does arise. Because there's me, you. There's opposition. Because there is a little me. What we've done is that what we've done by grasping to me is we've made a little target here and saying, hurt me, hurt me. That's what self-grasping does. And then someone says some insulting word, you're really hurt because you've created the target by grasping to this me here. But if there's no grasping, these words will just go straight through, no harm, no fear. In fact, the more fear comes from more grasping. Less grasping, less fear. No grasping, no fear. In fact, fear would be impossible with no grasping. Impossible, because there's no target. No. Sure.
Then I was thinking, since you're talking about quantum physics, So what do you have to say about the latest stuff going on about the expanding universe and the dark energy? So what is the relationship of emptiness and this dark universe?
Yeah, it's interesting. And physicists, I think, sort of say they know a lot about the universe, but 95% of it is apparently supposed to be dark energy and matter. They know nothing about that. So
Energy and emptiness, what is the
yeah. So emptiness, what we have to understand, emptiness is not some thing out there. Emptiness is how things exist. So whether we're talking dark energy, dark matter, normal matter, energy, they are all.
Would emptiness be dark energy?
No,
According to physicists,
no, because
that
emptiness,
is how everything.
emptiness is not a thing. Emptiness is the quality of everything. So whether we're talking matter, energy, dark matter, emptiness is how all of these things exist. None of these things, whether it's matter and energy, dark energy, none of it exists independently. So emptiness is not like some thing we're going to find out there. Emptiness is a quality, is how everything exists. So actually emptiness is a negation that things are not independently existent. So it's not, emptiness is not like energy or matter or anything like that. You know, what dark energy and dark matter is, physicists still have to find out. But what the Buddhist assertion
The
is,
universe is expanding, so what is expanding? And
that from the physicist side would be the physical universe would be expanding, matter or dark matter or whatever you want to call it. Any last question? Otherwise, one more question. Yeah.
I learned somewhere that to attain Buddhahood, you need to have both compassion and emptiness understanding. So, are there any what kind of steps like you have to have attain compassion first and then go for emptiness, or is it the basis of the emptiness is compassion?
Yeah, very good question. The question is about these two wings of practice of wisdom and compassion, or emptiness and compassion. And they're called the two wings because we need to practice both of them. And as I mentioned, and it's true, I think, is that once you come to realize emptiness and you release that self-grasping, then the natural expression is compassion, is loving kindness. So then people go, oh, I don't need to practice that then. I just practice emptiness and then the compassion will just come later. That may be true, but the thing is, if you don't practice compassion separately now, you'll never realize emptiness because you need the compassion, like the ethics, as the fertile ground for the realizing of the emptiness, because that provides the juice for your emptiness practice, the compassion. And in the Mahayana, of course, that compassion is bodhicitta. So that bodhicitta, that aspiration for enlightenment for the benefit of others, that gives the power to the emptiness practice. So as a beginner, we practice them individually, but in the end, we'll see that they're actually two sides of the coin. Is that out of emptiness, the natural expression of emptiness is loving kindness and compassion. But as a beginner, you're right, we need to practice them together individually. Sometimes we need to emphasize more compassion, sometimes more emptiness, but we need a balance of both. It's important. Yeah.
A bit louder so that everybody. And I can have a negative louder. That's me.
Are you the attention? Okay. So we're negating things. So emptiness is a negation of what we're not, you know. We're not existing objectively. So we're not the body, we're not the mind, and so forth. And so that emptiness is the experience that we do not exist independently. But that experience, of course, takes place within awareness. So the awareness is always there, but awareness, we can't point to awareness and say, that's me either. But awareness is there because you can't just have, emptiness is not floating in space. Emptiness is an experience within awareness. So in that sense, when you're realizing emptiness, awareness will be present, but not as me. A findable me. The awareness is not a findable me. See, we always want to find something. So, yeah. So you, in the experience of emptiness, of course, that only happens within awareness. So when you're experiencing emptiness, the awareness will be present. Maybe that's what you're talking about. Yeah. Okay, I think we've run out of time there, so let's leave it there. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming along this evening. I didn't create too much confusion, and I think it's been going to be recorded so you can listen to it again at some later date. And I hope to be back again, not too distant future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So please, center.
Thank you. Thank you.
And come again soon.
Yes, sure, we'll do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.